Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about a topic that creates some controversy that really shouldn't, and that is when it comes to an actual display of strength, the amount of weight that you move for one rep actually is a larger display of strength than any sort of rep work that you do. And some people are going to argue, oh, Jason, you're just saying that because you train singles and blah, blah, blah. The reality is the vast overwhelming majority of my training is very high rep. Anyone who watches my vlogs knows that. So you can't use that excuse of, well, Jason, you just prefer maxes. I hit singles on 2 lifts per week. I do enormous amounts of 10, 20, 30 rep sets, things like that. I do way more 30 rep sets than I do 1 rep sets. How about that? I actually do every single week. Way more 30s. Not even in the ballpark. So you can't use that excuse with me, guys. That's silly. It doesn't work. But the reality is 1 rep maxes are how we define strength. And the reason I wanted to do this topic, and this won't be up for a while, but someone had seen, I think they asked me, and I haven't actually gone to see the video. They're like, what do you think of Eric Bugenhagen's 315 for whatever, 15 reps or something they claimed he benched? I'm like, well, I just watched him bench like 420 or something last week. Didn't he just hit a big 400 plus pound bench? Well, who cares? Like, who cares how many times he can rep 315 when he benches over 400? It's 315 pounds. I bench more than 315. Who gives a shit? Right? Why do you care? That doesn't mean anything. You build a lot of muscle doing a bunch of reps with 315, but that's not a display of strength. In other words, if you can do on an exercise 315 for 15 reps versus 320 for 1, the 320 for 1 is more strength being displayed. And I think people confuse strength potential with a display of strength. Because what is strength? How do we define strength? Strength is the production of force against an external object. It requires more force to move 320 pounds than to move 315. Doesn't matter if you did 315 for 1,753 repetitions nonstop. You still only produce the amount of force required to move the 315. You did more work. Okay. Work done over time is not the same as force being produced. Force production, rate of force production. All right. It's like if you see someone do a big vertical jump. Do we care when you see a guy do an enormously high vertical leap? Do we say, yeah, but this other guy, well, that guy, okay, sure, that guy has a 40-inch vertical, but this other guy did 28 inches 15 times in a row. Well, which one's a greater display of power and explosiveness? The 40-inch vertical. Like, it's not even in question. A 40-inch vertical is insane, by the way. For anyone who knows anything about other things outside of lifting in the athletic world, a 40-inch vertical is like mutant level genetic vertical. Like you're a genetic freak if you have a 40-inch vertical. Like, you're a straight up freak. Like, you are very genetically blessed. The overwhelming majority of people can never train to reach a 40-inch vertical, no matter how hard they train. And how much they work at it, how much specialization, they're simply never going to reach that. That is a God-given talent in your genes to have the ability to do a 40-inch vertical. Okay. There might be a lot more people who could crank out 28 for 15 in a row, maybe. But, you see the point. It's a greater display. And in that case, we're looking at jumping ability. How high can you jump? Particularly in a very strict environment like the vertical. That's not a running jump. That's not a broad jump. Like vertical leap. That is a very specific test of specific performance attributes. That's almost its own strength display, actually. But that's a strength over time. That's definitely a rate of force production display. Like, how much strength can you display in a tenth of a second? Because that's what it takes to have a vertical like that. Extremely powerful person to do that. So when we're talking about lifting, it's a 1 rep max. That is how we define strength. And other people will say, well, I don't define it that way. Well, no one cares. Why don't you just make your own words up then? If you're going to just make your own language, instead of calling it strength, why don't you just make your own word and call it flipty floppy flu pop? Just make your own words. You don't get to change the definitions of words just because you want to believe something different. Don't call it strength, call it flea flop bleepin' blobbin'. Make your own words up, because that's what you're doing. You don't get to define strength, what is already an existing term in sports sciences. Your opinion is completely irrelevant. Doesn't matter. Strength is the production of force against an external object. We generally measure and quantify displays of that by how much weight you can lift one time. And yeah, the one time, it's a higher force production. If you lifted 5 more pounds versus whatever reps you did with 5 pounds lighter, it's a greater display of force because it takes more force to do it. Okay? Now, some people will say, well, I don't believe there's leverages involved. Okay. There's no way to remove leverages. And I want to make that very, very clear also when we come to these topics. People come up with nonsense like, well, I don't accept that display because of leverages. What are you going to do? Get rid of the skeleton? You can't get rid of leverages in any display of strength. On any lift either. And ironically, the lifts that people complain about leverages the most compared to a lot of things that you do in the gym every day, there's less leverage involved. And that might come as a shock. Like people say, well, the deadlift. Well, yeah, mainly it's because of the ranges of motion and stuff vary a lot based upon arm length and structure and footing and the ability to clear your knees, things like that, right? But do you think that leverages matter on a deadlift nearly as much as, say, a barbell curl or a dumbbell curl? A curl is more impacted by leverages. Like how much weight you can actually lift strictly on a curl has way more leverage involvement biomechanically, your individual leverage as a person, than any big barbell movement does. Squat, bench, deadlift, overhead press, any of those. It is so dramatically more amplified by leverages. But you don't see people talking about that, about how much weight dumbbells they pick. Yeah, it's very much based upon your forearm length. Okay, 1 inch longer forearms, 2 inch longer forearms than another person or shorter is going to make a ridiculous difference in how much weight you can strict curl. It's going to be ludicrous. And you just have to look at the moment arms involved. No, leverages matter way more on single joint movements than they do on squats or deadlifts. But yes, people will try to find their best leverages, but they don't make the weight difference that you think they do. In other words, certain foot positions on these movements will let you bring more muscles into play. Well, if you're bringing more muscles into play, you're producing more force. Like that doesn't change anything. You used more muscles to produce more force. That doesn't change the force production at all. That actually enhances it. That actually is an argument in the other direction. No, they did produce more force because they got additional hip and not just the quad being used, right? Or they added more glute. They added more big muscles to it. Okay, well, yeah, they produce more force. The more muscles you can throw at something, the more force you're going to produce, you as a person. It should be common sense. That shouldn't be a controversy or a negative. Now, we could argue about ranges of motion. But realistically, do you really think that having a shorter range of motion because one person has slightly shorter legs and longer arms, they're not going to get 200 pounds out of a deadlift on that? They're probably not. Maybe Kaylor Woolham does. I don't know. But even then, even with his long arms, he's also just built to deadlift and he's strong in the muscles at the deadlift. Okay. Keep that in mind. because he can, everyone says, well, he got the long arms and he sumos, but he can conventional ultra elite numbers also. For reps, like straight up, like his rep work, if it was just a 1 rep max, the same weight on the bar. Like not extrapolating to a max, like what he can do for 3 reps, just that weight by itself on his conventionals is ultra elite. And he's playing with that weight almost. But he's got some leverage advantages. But there's definitely a force production thing happening there, because when you remove some of his leverage advantages on his world record lifts and make him do harder variations, he's still top 0.5%. He's still in the best of the best. So the leverages matter for some of these as far as bar travel and stuff, but they're not complete game changers. They'll give people some extra pounds, absolutely. You know, it could be the difference between a 500 and a 530 or a 550 deadlift, maybe. It can be. But it's not going to be the difference between a 500 and a 700, okay? Unless you're doing totally different exercises. Like a high handle trap bar, you might pull 200 more. Fair enough. But it's a different exercise with completely different center of gravity and range of motion. But people make a bigger deal about this leverage thing than there needs to be. It matters, but it doesn't matter at anything but the very top tiers in strength sports. It's not going to make or break you at the regional level in a strength sport. Okay, it's just not. Okay, it's not going to stop you from getting elite numbers just because you have bad leverages. So let's be a little more practical with that. But at the end of the day, guys, force is measured with 1 rep maxes. That's how we measure it. That is the display of strength. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.